The first thing I noticed was how quiet they both were. Mark never could sit still, not even when he was a boy, and there he was at my kitchen table. 45 years old and drumming his fingers against the wood like a teenager about to ask for the car keys. Lisa sat next to him, back straight, hands folded too carefully in her lap, as if she'd practiced looking calm in the bathroom mirror. Jenny floated behind them, rearranging the same clean spoon on the counter 3 times, pretending she had some reason to be there other than backing up her husband. Between me and them sat my coffee mug half full and going cold, and a neat blue folder with my bank statements tucked inside. On top of that, like a cherry on a very bitter Sunday, lay a thick white envelope with my lawyer's letterhead. "Dad," Mark said finally, clearing his throat. "We've been talking." I wrapped my hands around the mug, chased the last bit of warmth. Whenever my children started a sentence with, "We've been talking," it meant they'd decided something about my life before asking me what I thought. "Is that so?" I said. "About what?" He glanced at Lisa, then back at me. "About you. About everything you're juggling right now." Lisa put on that soft smile she uses on her kids when she's about to tell them no. "We just worry about you, Dad. That's all." I looked past them, around my little kitchen. Same faded curtains Margaret picked out 30 years ago. Same dent in the refrigerator door from the time Mark tried to juggle canned peaches. A single plate on the drying rack. Nothing in here looked particularly heavy to carry. "I don't feel like I'm juggling much," I said. "I pay my bills, water my plants, argue with the TV. It's a simple life." Jenny turned from the counter, drying her hands on a towel she didn't need. "It's not just that," she said gently. "There's other stuff too." Her eyes flicked just for a second to the blue folder at my elbow. "Other stuff," I repeated. "You'll have to be more specific, honey. At my age, if you leave things too vague, I might get confused." Mark chuckled weakly. "Come on, Dad. You know what we mean. Your savings, the house, investments. Managing all that, it's a lot of stress when you're, on your own." There it was. They'd circled the field enough times. Now they were finally lining up for the landing. I said. I took a slow sip of coffee, watching them over the rim. "Funny, I don't feel particularly stressed. A little bored sometimes, maybe." Lisa leaned forward, elbows resting on the table like we were sharing a secret. "Things are different now, though," she said. "You've got more to think about. And with the markets being so unstable, it might be smart to have someone younger helping keep an eye on things." "Someone like you?" I said. She gave a small, rehearsed laugh. "Well, we are your kids." "That you are," I said. "Last I checked. Anyway." Mark took a deep breath like he was about to jump into a cold lake. "Look, Dad, we're not asking for anything. Not really, we just think it might be safer if we put your accounts into, more of a family structure. Maybe a joint account, or we could sign a few papers so Lisa and I can help manage transfers, bills, that kind of thing. Just to make sure nothing happens to it." "To it?" I said. "You're worried something might happen to my money." He frowned. "Well, yeah. Scammers, bad investments, mistakes. At your age, it's easy to click the wrong thing, Lisa jumped in quickly. "And we've got experience. I mean, between the kids' college stuff, the mortgage, our retirement funds, we've had to learn a lot. We could take some of that weight off your shoulders." I let my eyes drop to Mark's hands. The same hands that once wrapped around my steering wheel when he begged me to teach him to drive. Now they were tapping faster, betraying his nerves. "You two have been learning a lot about money, have you?" I said. "Funny thing about money, once you've got some, everybody suddenly becomes an expert." Jenny shifted again, but she didn't speak. Wise woman, that one. She always did know when to hold her tongue. Mark leaned in. "Dad, come on. We're just trying to protect you. Managing $500,000 at your age, that's a lot of stress." There it was, plain as day. $500,000. They said it like an accusation and a temptation at the same time. I set my mug down carefully. The ceramic clicked against the saucer louder than it needed to. I said, "I seem to remember a time not too long ago when a much smaller number caused you both a lot more discomfort." Lisa's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" I looked at the folder, then back at them. "I got a bill once," I said slowly. "Not for investments. For a surgery. A heart procedure, they called it. I was lying in a hospital bed, and they told me without it, my chances weren't good. Do you remember that? Mark shifted in his seat. Dad, that was a complicated time. Was it? I said. I remember it pretty clearly. The amount, too. $4,987. Funny how numbers stick in your head when they're tied to whether you wake up the next morning. Lisa's cheeks colored. You know, it wasn't that simple. Things were tight, Anne. Tight. I repeated. Yes, I recall. College funds, credit card interest, truck repairs. There was no way, you said. Not even if we split it 3 ways. Not even if it was your old man's chest they were planning to cut open. Mark raised his hands a little, defensive. We did the best we could. You're misremembering the tone, Dad. We were scared, too. I met his eyes and held them. I may be old, I said quietly, but I remember every word you said when I begged you for help. I remember the way you looked at each other like I'd asked you for something outrageous. $5,000 to keep me breathing. That was too much. Nobody moved. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator. And now, I went on, letting the silence work on them for a moment. Know you're here, worried that managing $500,000 is too much for me. You want to help. Lisa swallowed. We just don't want anything to happen to it. To you? To me? I said, almost amused. Funny how death makes people sentimental. Especially other people's death, when there's money involved. Jenny finally spoke up, her voice brittle. That's not fair. George, they love you. We all do. I looked at her, then at the thick envelope by my hand. Love, I murmured. That's a word folks like to throw around when they're about to slide papers across a table. Mark's gaze darted to the envelope for the first time. What's that? He asked. This. I lifted it between 2 fingers. The heavy paper bent, then straightened. Just something from my lawyer. Instructions. My will. Lisa's eyes widened. You already went to a lawyer. Without talking to us. I've been talking to a lot of people, I said. Thinking a lot, too. About who showed up when it counted and who didn't. About what my life was worth to some folks. Back when all I had was a hospital gown and a beeping monitor. Lisa's voice turned small. Dad, that was a different situation. We didn't know what to do. You knew how to add? I said. You knew how to subtract 5,000 from your various priorities and decide where your father fit on that list. Mark's jaw tightened. We're here now, aren't we? Yes, I said. You are. Now that there's $500,000 to manage. I sat back and looked at them, really looked, the way you study strangers who happen to share your nose or your chin. Their nervous hands, their darting eyes, the way their concern slipped whenever the word money came up. They once refused to pay $5,000 so I could live. I said softly, more to myself than to them. Then I met their eyes again. Now you're begging for my $500,000. But you have no idea what I've already done with it. Mark blinked. What do you mean? I felt a thin, humorless smile tug at my mouth. If you'd known then what you know now, I said. Maybe you wouldn't have left me to die in that hospital bed. Lisa opened her mouth, closed it again. Jenny set the towel down, her knuckles white. You want to help? I said. Then sit there and listen. Because if you really want to understand what's going to happen to this money, you need to know what happened with that bill. You need to know what you did to me 2 years ago. I slid the envelope back onto the folder, out of their reach. My coffee had gone cold, but my memory was sharp as broken glass. I wasn't always the old man with the blue folder and the lawyer's envelope. There was a time when the only paper that scared me was a pink slip, not a medical bill. I came from people who measured wealth in full bellies and boots without holes. My father worked the line at the mill until his back gave out. My mother took in mending at the kitchen table. We didn't have much, but we had enough. And you learned early that if something broke, you fixed it yourself or you went without. That's how I ended up in maintenance at the factory. 42 years of bad coffee louder machines, and being the fellow everyone called when something sparked or leaked or jammed. I met Margaret at the corner store, of all places. She was arguing with the clerk over a mispriced loaf of bread, chin lifted, eyes flashing. And I thought, that's the woman I'm going to marry. Took me another 1.5 years to convince her, but she said yes, and for a long time, that was the best decision I ever made. We never had a big house, just a 2-bedroom box with aluminum siding and a postage stamp yard, but we filled it. First with boxes and hand-me-down furniture, then with Mark's toy cars and Lisa's stuffed animals, and later with science projects that smelled like vinegar and wet cardboard. I remember standing in the yard on a cold Saturday morning, breath fogging in the air, coaching Mark through his first season of Little League. He didn't have much of an arm, but he had determination. Every time the ball smacked his glove, he'd look over to make sure I'd seen it. "Good catch, buddy," I'd shout, clapping my hands until they stung. "Told you could do it." At night, after the kids were in bed, Margaret and I would sit at the Formica table with the checkbook and a stack of bills. She'd chew the end of her pen, I'd rub the bridge of my nose, and between the two of us we'd stretch my paycheck far enough to cover rent, groceries, and whatever the school sent home that week. Sometimes that meant I volunteered for extra shifts. Sometimes it meant we ate more beans and less meat. "Don't kill yourself over it," Margaret would say when I came home smelling like oil and sweat. "The kids don't need everything the neighbors have." "Maybe not," I'd answer, sucking at the grease under my fingernails. "But I'll be damned if Mark goes to school in shoes with the soles falling off." She'd shake her head, smiling. "You're too hard on yourself. And on Mark. He'll grow out of all that wanting." I wish she'd been right. As they got older, the wanting grew along with them. Mark was always comparing. His friends had new bikes, name-brand jeans, game consoles with blinking lights. I still remember the Christmas he was 14 when I handed him a refurbished computer I'd saved up for. He frowned. "Jason got a new one. With a flat screen." "This one works just fine," I said. "Got it from a guy at work. He rebuilt the whole thing." "But it's old," he muttered, sulking. "Why can't we ever get anything new?" Back then, I chalked it up to adolescence. We butted heads, sure, but he still came to me when his car made a funny noise or when he didn't understand his math homework. Lisa was different. Quieter on the surface, but she knew how to twist a phrase to get what she wanted. When the school announced a class trip to Washington, D.C., she came home with the permission slip clutched like a winning lottery ticket. "All my friends' parents paid for their trips," she said when she saw my face. "Why can't you?" "We have to see if we can afford it," I told her, honest. "It's not cheap. If you loved me, Dad, you'd find a way," she whispered, and it hit me right in the chest. Margaret squeezed my hand under the table. "They're just young," she murmured later when we were alone. "They don't understand yet." "They're not going to understand if everything just appears," I said. "They should know what it costs." Still, I took extra shifts. I drove the forklift on weekends and swept up metal shavings when the regular janitor went home. We scraped together enough to send Lisa on that trip, just like we'd find a way, a few years later, to borrow against our only car so she could get braces. I don't want her hiding her smile because we were too cheap, I told Margaret when she worried about the payments. "What about our own teeth?" She tried to joke, but she signed the forms with me anyway. College was the big one. Mark changed his major twice, first from business to communications, then to something about media that I never quite understood. Every time he switched, the counselor talked about staying on track and maximizing opportunities. And every time, the tuition bill went up. "Don't worry, Dad," he'd say over the phone from his dorm. "Once I graduate, I'll pay you back. Things are just tight right now." Things were always tight, right now. Lisa didn't go away for school. She commuted to community college, then got a job at a daycare. She called more for conversation back then, but even she had a way of ending chats with, "By the way, could you maybe help with?" followed by whatever her latest crisis was. A flat tire, a fee, a deposit. I didn't mind, not really. That's what fathers are for, I told myself. You give until it hurts a little, and then you give a little more. I thought if I made enough sacrifices, they'd never have to make any. Then Margaret got sick. Cancer is a thief that doesn't bother knocking. It slipped into our lives slow and mean, taking her hair, her appetite, her strength. It took my sleep, my savings, and eventually her. 5 years ago, I held her hand in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and wilted flowers and listened to the heart monitor slow, Then stop. After the funeral, the house felt cavernous, though it was the same small place we'd always had. Every creak sounded louder without her humming in the kitchen, without our nightly debates over game shows and politics. At first, the kids rallied. Lisa brought casseroles I couldn't taste. Mark helped me sort through the insurance papers and the bills, sitting at the same Formica table where he'd once done homework. They called every few days. Then, as the months went on, the calls spread out. Visits turned into quick drop-ins on their way somewhere else. When the phone rang, it was more often, "Dad, could you watch the kids Saturday?" Or, "Dad, our roof is leaking. Can you spot us until payday?" Then, "How are you holding up?" "It's not that we don't want to visit more," Lisa would say when I hinted at the quiet. "Life is just crazy. You understand." "I understand," I'd tell her. "You've got your own family now." I meant it. But some nights I'd sit alone at that table, the chair across from me empty, and feel a cold kind of tired settle into my bones. Financially, I was okay. Not rich, not poor. The house was finally paid off thanks to decades of careful payments and Margaret's habit of tucking away every extra dollar. I had around $60,000 in savings, a modest pension from the factory and Social Security. I even picked up a little part-time work at the hardware store down the road, not because I needed the money desperately, but because I wasn't ready to sit and wait for the clock to run out. Back then, I thought $60,000 in the bank meant I was as rich as I'd ever be. Enough for a leaky roof, a busted water heater, maybe a small trip I'd never quite get around to taking. Certainly enough, I believed, to handle whatever little bumps old age threw my way. I'd stand in the backyard some mornings, coffee in hand, looking at the patchy grass and the rose bushes Margaret planted, and think the worst is behind me. I survived layoffs at the plant, scraped through kids' colleges, and buried the love of my life. What more could life really take? I found out one Tuesday morning, when I was still mowing my own lawn and thinking I was invincible. It started with a pain in my chest that didn't feel like heartburn and ended with me staring at a number on a hospital bill, realizing that all those years of giving had taught my children something I never intended. They'd learned to take. Everything came to a head that day, with me on a gurney, a doctor talking about blockages, and a piece of paper that put a price tag on my heartbeat. I remember the exact moment my heart decided it had had enough of carrying other people. It was a Tuesday late morning, and I was at the hardware store, standing on a short ladder in aisle 3, trying to fix a loose fluorescent light. I'd climbed up and down that same ladder 100 times. My knees complained, sure, but my chest never had. That day, when I reached overhead and twisted the bulb, something sharp grabbed hold right behind my breastbone. At first I thought it was indigestion from the donut I'd wolfed down at the register. I paused, breathed through it. The light flickered on, humming, and I told myself not to be dramatic. Then the pain spread, up into my jaw, down my left arm, a crushing weight like someone sitting on my ribs. I remember thinking, this isn't heartburn. The ladder blurred. The next thing I knew, my coworker Dave was shouting my name from very far away. "George! Hey, you okay?" I tried to answer, but the words got lost somewhere between my lungs and my mouth. The ladder wobbled. The bulb slipped from my fingers, shattered on the floor, and I followed it down. I came to with my back on cold cement, the ceiling a bright, spinning smear. Somebody was kneeling beside me, pressing something to my forehead. I heard Dave barking into his phone. 72, chest pain, collapsed at work. "Yes, he's conscious now, but he looks bad." "I'm fine," I muttered, which was a lie my body didn't believe. Every breath felt like pushing air through a rusted pipe. The ride in the ambulance was sirens and oxygen and the paramedic saying, "Stay with us, George." Does it hurt more when I press here? The answer was yes to everything. Fear sat heavy in my gut, but under it all was a stupid, nagging thought I can't afford a heart attack. At the hospital, they moved quickly. Blood tests, EKG, someone shaving patches on my chest, patches of my old man pride. A doctor with tired eyes and a stethoscope introduced himself as Dr. Patel. He listened to my heart frowning, then pointed at the monitor. "You've got some significant blockages, Mr. Harris," he said, not unkindly. "You're a heart attack waiting to happen." I thought this was the heart attack. I joked weakly. He didn't smile. "No, this was the warning. You need a stent procedure in the next few days, maybe sooner." We go in through the artery, open things up, place a stent to keep it open. It's not elective. Without it, your chances aren't good. Not good, I repeated. My mouth was dry. And with it, and with medication and lifestyle changes, you've got a very decent shot at a few more good years. He glanced at my chart. Given your history, I'd recommend we schedule this as soon as possible. I'd faced broken machinery, layoffs, even cancer with Margaret. But nothing made me feel quite as small as that monitor beeping out my own heartbeat. Then the financial counselor came in, clipboard in hand, and managed to make me feel even smaller. She was kind enough, explained my Medicare coverage and the supplemental plan I'd signed up for. Insurance will cover the bulk of the procedure, she said. But you do have a deductible and co-pay. Your out-of-pocket estimate would be approximately here. She slid the paper toward me. The number glared up, $4,987, plus a few odd cents. $5,000, give or take. A price tag on my chest. I did the math in my head the way I always did. Savings about $60,000 on paper. But a good chunk of that had vanished recently into a new roof that didn't leak on my head when it rained, and another chunk, $10,000, to help Mark get over a hump in his business. What I had liquid and accessible without penalties or selling something fast was closer to $1,500. I don't have all of that, I admitted, hating the way the words tasted. We can discuss payment plans, she said quickly. But for scheduling, the hospital generally needs a commitment for the estimated co-pay up front. Sometimes family assists, or we can look into charity funds. Family. Lying there in a thin gown, with an IV in my arm and that number on the page, the first faces that came to mind were my kids. Not the way they looked now, with worry lines and thinning hair, but Mark with his baseball cap crooked on his head, Lisa with braces and a school backpack too big for her shoulders. I dug my phone out of the plastic bag they'd stuffed my belongings into. My hands shook, from the drugs or the fear or both. I called Mark first. It rang twice. "Hey, Dad," he said. "What's up?" His voice was casual, distracted. I could hear a TV in the background. "I'm at the hospital," I said. "I had some chest pain at work. They say it's my heart." Silence. The TV clicked off. "What? Are you okay? Do I need to come down there?" "I'm stable," they said. "But they want to do a procedure. A stent. Soon." "Jesus," he muttered. Okay, what do you need?" I swallowed. "That's the thing. Insurance covers most of it, but there's a co-pay. Just under $5,000. I've got about $1,500 I can access easily. But they want the rest committed before they schedule." There was a pause on the line, a small one, but I heard it. I felt it crawl under my skin. "Can't the hospital work out a payment plan or something?" he asked. "I mean, $5,000 that's a lot right now?" I asked. I said. "They said they can talk about plans. But they usually need a chunk up front to even get it on the schedule." He was quiet again. I pictured him rubbing the back of his neck the way he always did when he didn't like what he was hearing. "Dad, it's not that I don't want to help," he said finally. "But things are rough right now. We're behind on a few cards, the truck needs work, and the kids' stuff. You know how it is." "I know," I said. My throat felt tight. "Could you maybe put some on a card and I'll pay you back?" "It's not that simple," he said quickly. "We're already maxed out. Interest is killing us. Let me talk to Lisa, see what she can do, and we'll figure something out. Don't agree to anything yet, okay?" He hung up with a promise to call back. The beeping of the monitor seemed louder after that. I lay there, the phone heavy in my hand, and scrolled to Lisa's number. She picked up on the first ring. "Hi, Dad. Everything okay?" "Not really," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm at County General. Had some chest pain. They did tests. It's my heart." "Oh my God," she gasped. "Are you serious? Are you okay? Do I need to get the kids and come right now?" "I'm stable," I said, repeating the doctor's word like a prayer. "They want to do a stent. Soon. Insurance covers most of it, but there's a $5,000 co-pay." There was a sharp inhale on the other end. "5,000. She repeated, like she'd measured. "Just under that, yes. I've got about $1,500 I can get to quickly. They said they can maybe arrange something for the rest, but they like to have as much as possible before they schedule. I was wondering if you and Mark could help make up the difference." We could work out a way for me to pay you back gradually. Dad, she said slowly, we just paid for Ethan's braces. Insurance barely touched that. And daycare is killing us. We've got the mortgage, the car, everything. We don't have 5,000 just lying around. I'm not asking you to have it lying around, I said, my voice smaller than I wanted. I'm asking if you can put anything toward it. Whatever you can. She sighed, a long, weary sound. You know we'd help if we could, she said. But we've been stretched so thin. I don't know where we'd even get that kind of money. Maybe the hospital has some program, charity care. You should ask. They do that sometimes for seniors. I stared at the beige ceiling. They mentioned funds. I'm talking to the counselor. Good, she said, with relief you'd expect if I'd told her someone else was footing the bill. See what they can do first, okay? We're barely keeping our heads above water as it is. Of course, I murmured. I wouldn't want to be a burden. Don't say that, she replied quickly. You're not a burden, Dad. We can't take that kind of hit, not with the kids. You understand, don't you? I closed my eyes. Of course, I said, though nothing in me understood at all. They both came later that day, Mark with Jenny and Tao, Lisa with a Tupperware of something I wouldn't be allowed to eat. They fussed over my pillows, asked the nurses questions, made all the right noises. You'd never know watching them. That money had passed between our conversations like a quiet, unwelcome guest. The next morning, the financial counselor arranged a meeting in a small room off the cardiac wing. She was there with her clipboard, Dr. Patel with his charts, and my two children sitting side by side like a united front. We do have some resources, the counselor said. There's a charity fund that may cover a portion of your co-pay. If you qualify, it could take care of up to $3,000. That would still leave about $2,000 out of pocket. $2,000. A smaller number, but suddenly it felt heavier. If we split it 3 ways, I said carefully, looking from Mark to Lisa, that's, what about 600 and something each after my 1,500? Lisa shifted. Mark didn't meet my eyes. It's not that simple, Mark said. Like I told you, Dad, we're already in deep with the cards. Putting another 700 on there at this interest, it's just not smart. I've got the truck too. If that goes, I can't work. Lisa nodded vigorously. We just can't take that kind of hit, not with the kids. I mean, college is around the corner, and we're finally putting something away. If we wipe that out, there must be programs. Mark cut in. Isn't there Medicaid or some kind of, I don't know, indigent care? He worked his whole life. The system should help. The charity fund is part of that, the counselor said gently. We're using every resource we have. What about selling his car? Lisa suggested. He barely drives. Or maybe, look, nobody wants to say it, but this house is worth something, right? Maybe a smaller place, assisted living somewhere with medical staff. That might be safer anyway, long term. They were talking about my life like it was a budget spreadsheet. Debits, credits, assets to be liquidated. Dr. Patel cleared his throat. Delays increase risk, he reminded us. The longer we wait, the more likely Mr. Harris is to have a major cardiac event. This isn't elective, it's necessary. Without it, his chances aren't good. My chances, my life, my kids' faces were pinched, not with grief, but with calculation. I waited for someone to say, "We'll figure it out, Dad." Don't worry. That's what I would have said. That's what I thought parents and children did for each other. Instead, Mark said, "Can we have a few days to explore options?" And Lisa asked, "Is there any way to manage this with medications instead of surgery? Medications alone won't fix the blockage." Dr. Patel said firmly, "Would be managing symptoms and hoping for the best. It's not what I'd recommend." They exchanged a look over my head, one I'd seen before when they were kids plotting something minor. Now it felt like they were plotting my odds. Shame washed over me, hot and cold at the same time. Here I was, 72 years old, asking my own children to help buy me a few more years, and they were treating it like a bad investment. "I'll find a way," I heard myself say, though my voice sounded far away. "We'll make it work." The counselor looked at me with something like pity. "We'll do everything we can, Mr. Harris," she said. Back in my hospital bed that night, The ward lights dimmed and the hallway filled with the soft shush of rubber soles. Machines beeped in uneven harmony, a chorus of hearts under surveillance. I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying every "I'll pay you back and if you loved me, Dad" I'd ever heard. I'd spent my whole life making sure they never had to choose between bills and being okay. I worked overtime so Mark could change majors twice, signed loans so Lisa could smile without hiding her teeth. I thought I was building a safety net under them. When it was my turn to fall, they looked down from the edge and clutched their wallets. They chose their money. I didn't know it yet, but I still had more to lose, and more to learn. Then I understood in that lonely hospital bed. The next conversation took place not in some solemn family living room, but in the hospital cafeteria, under buzzing lights and the smell of burnt coffee. They wheeled me down there in a chair because a change of scenery will do you good, Mr. Harris. I sat at a sticky table with a plastic bracelet on my wrist, my heart monitored somewhere up the hall, while my 2 children and a social worker discussed the cost of keeping me alive over cold French fries and Jell-O cups. Mark stirred a third packet of sugar into his coffee, like it might soften what he was about to say. Lisa picked at the corner of a napkin, tearing it into thin strips, eyes darting from me to the clipboard in the social worker's hands. "We just want to talk through options," the social worker said gently. She'd introduced herself as Carla, but to me she was another uniform between me and a bill I couldn't pay. "We know the co-pay is a lot. Sometimes families explore different hospitals, different levels of care." "Like what?" I asked. My voice came out hoarser than I meant. "You mean cheaper hospitals?" "Well," she said, "there are state facilities, community hospitals outside the city that sometimes have lower out-of-pocket costs. We also have to consider your long-term care needs. If, for whatever reason, you can't get the procedure right away, we'd focus on medications and monitoring." Mark seized on that. "See, Dad, it might make more sense to look at a state place or something. Or a hospital out of town where it's cheaper. We don't have to rush into anything." I looked at him. "Rush," I echoed. "The doctor said the longer we wait, the worse my chances." Lisa leaned in, her voice soft but firm. "A friend of mine, her dad had heart issues. They didn't do the surgery right away. He just took meds, watched his diet, and he's still around. You might not need something this extreme." Dr. Patel, who'd come along but was standing, arms folded, at the edge of the table, cleared his throat. "Every case is different," he said, his tone polite but edged. "In your father's specific case, medications alone are unlikely to prevent a major event. The blockages we saw are significant." "But you said it's not an emergency," Mark countered. "I mean, he's stable, right?" "Stable for now," Dr. Patel agreed. "That can change quickly. My medical recommendation is the stent, sooner rather than later." "Medical recommendation," Lisa repeated. She looked at me, eyes wide with a concern that somehow didn't reach her wallet. "We love you, Dad, but we also have to be realistic. We can't ignore all the other factors." Realistic. It was a word I'd used myself over the years when explaining why we couldn't buy some toy or go on some trip. Hearing it thrown back at me now made my chest ache in a whole new way. Carla glanced at her notes. "We did find a charity fund that could help," she said. "It's needs-based, and given your income, Mr. Harris, you likely qualify. It could cover up to $3,000 of your co-pay." $3,000. I did the subtraction automatically. 5,000 minus 3 minus my 1,500, that left about 500, give or take, if everything came through. So that would leave roughly 2,000 unaccounted for, she concluded. "We still need to address that, and the hospital does ask for commitments before scheduling." I swallowed. "If we split it 3 ways," I said, my voice trembling despite my best effort, "between me, Mark, and Lisa, that's less than 1,000 each. I can scrape together a bit more if I move some things around." There was a split second where I held my breath and waited for one of them to say it. That simple sentence I'd always imagined would be there if I ever truly needed them. "We'll figure it out, Dad." Mark exhaled slowly instead. "Dad, I literally don't have it," he said. "I'd have to max out another card, and our interest is already insane. We've finally been making a dent, and if we throw another $1,000 on there, we're right back where we started." Lisa nodded. We're already stretched to breaking, just trust me. We finally started a college fund for the kids. If we drain that or take on more debt, what happens if something else goes wrong? The car, the house, life doesn't stop. You always said not to put yourself in debt for anyone. Mark added, as if he were quoting scripture. That you regretted every time you did. I stared at him. I said that. I agreed slowly, after I'd already done it. For you. For your sister. He shifted, looked away. This is us being responsible, he said. You raised us to think about the future. That's what we're doing. Responsible. That was the word they used when they explained why $5,000 was too high a price for my life. Lisa reached out, touched my hand. You always told us you didn't want to end up a burden. She reminded me gently. We're trying to honor that. We're not abandoning you. We're just saying we can't blow up everything we've worked for. Not even for this. Not even for this. This being my functioning heart. I pulled my hand back slowly. So what do you suggest? I asked. If you can't help, and the charity fund doesn't cover all of it, what's your realistic plan? They looked at each other, then back at me. Well, Lisa began carefully, maybe this is a sign we should start thinking about different living arrangements. Long term, I mean. You're alone in that house. What if something happens again? An assisted living place might actually be better for you. A home, I said. The word lodged like a stone in my throat. Not in a bad way, she rushed to clarify. There are nice ones. With nurses' activities, other people your age. And if you sold the house, you'd have money to cover this surgery and more. You wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or stairs or... So because I can't afford to pay this bill in cash right now, I said slowly, the solution is to sell the only place your mother and I ever owned, move into a home, and free up more money so I don't waste what little I have left on utilities. That's not what we're saying, Mark protested. We're thinking long-term here. You have to admit, it's getting harder for you. Stairs, shoveling snow, we're worried. You're scaring the kids with all this talk about surgeries and money, Lisa added. They're already anxious. If we go into massive debt now, we won't be able to help you later when you really can't manage. Then what? Nobody wins. So, by their math, if I insisted on this surgery, I was not only endangering their finances but also any future care I might need. Choosing to live became an act of selfishness. You're making us feel like bad children just because we can't magically pull money out of thin air, Lisa said, her eyes shining with offended tears. That's not fair, Dad. Carla cleared her throat softly. No one is saying anyone is bad. We're just trying to find a solution that works for everyone. Everyone. It seemed everyone had a lot riding on my decision except me. You're stressed, Dad? Mark said, his tone shifting to soothing condescension. You're not thinking clearly. The doctors throw numbers and worst-case scenarios at you, and it sounds urgent, but maybe we need to slow down. Look at other options. Cheaper hospitals, state coverage, maybe even palliative care if the risks are too high. I turned my head toward Dr. Padel. He met my gaze, his expression a mixture of professionalism and something like frustration. My recommendation hasn't changed, he said quietly. This surgery gives you the best chance at more quality years. Medications alone are a gamble. But nothing's guaranteed, Mark countered, so you can't blame us for weighing the odds. I sat there, listening to my children talk about odds and options, and felt something inside me tilt. Doubt crept in, not just about their willingness to help, but about my own worth. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was unreasonable to expect them to jeopardize their hard-won stability for an old man who might not have many years left anyway. Maybe wanting them to reach into their pockets the way I'd reached into mine, over and over, was selfish. As they argued softly with the doctor and the social worker, I shrank into myself. My shoulders curled in, my hand found the hospital bracelet and worried at it. I heard Margaret's voice in my head, from years ago, saying, "Don't kill yourself over it. The kids don't need everything the neighbors have." She hadn't met my heartbeat. That night, they went home, promising to do more research, to call if anything changes. I was wheeled back to my room. On the way, we passed another door standing half open. Inside, I saw a middle-aged woman holding an old man's hand, her voice warm and firm. We'll make it work, Daddy, she was saying. Don't you worry about the money. That's our problem, not yours. The door slid shut behind us. The words lingered in the sterile air. Back in my bed, hooked up to wires that chirped out my vulnerability, I stared at the darkened TV mounted on the wall. The shadows from the blinds made stripes across the ceiling. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor shrieked, then settled. I wondered if this was some kind of punishment. Had I failed them so badly that when their time came to carry me, they saw only weight, not worth? Had all my lectures about responsibility twisted into a shield they could hide behind while they watched me drown? For a few dreadful minutes, a terrible, tempting thought crept in. Maybe I should just let nature take its course. Sign a form, decline the procedure, save them their precious money, and spare myself the humiliation of begging for my life. Then another voice rose up, softer but stronger. Margaret's, from the last real conversation we'd had before the morphine took her words. Promise me you'll take care of yourself. She'd whispered, fingers clutching mine with surprising strength. Even if it's hard. Don't just give up because it feels like the easier thing. Lying there with wires on my chest and the echo of my children's excuses in my ears, I realized something brutal and clear. My life meant more to me than it did to them. They were willing to gamble with it to protect their comfort. I wasn't. I turned my head toward the window, watched the blinking lights of distant planes. All right, Margaret? I murmured in the dark. I'll try. I decided then that I would fight for the procedure, for however many years it might buy me, even if I had to do it without a single dollar from my own flesh and blood. If they thought I was a burden for wanting to live, that was a weight I would no longer carry for them. They had chosen their money. I chose my heartbeat. And I decided, quietly, that I would remember every second of how that choice played out. I didn't sleep much after I made that promise to Margaret in my head. The machines chimed and sighed around me, and every time my eyelids fluttered shut, I saw Mark's face, calculating, and Lissa's, pinched with something that looked more like fear for her bank account than for my heart. By mid-morning, I'd worked myself into a kind of numbness. I was staring at the television without hearing it when there was a knock on the doorframe. You planning on just lying there until the building falls down, or what? I turned my head, and for a second I thought the morphine was playing tricks on me. There, in the doorway, stood Ellen Davis from the plant, her gray hair cut short like always, steel-toed boots swapped for sensible sneakers, but the same no-nonsense squint behind her glasses. Ellen, I croaked. She walked in waving a paper visitor's badge like she'd talked her way through security. You look terrible, she said cheerfully, then leaned down and kissed my forehead. Good. Means you're still here. I felt something loosen in my chest that had nothing to do with arteries. What are you doing here? Dave from the hardware store came by the diner, she said, dragging the plastic chair closer to the bed. Told me you'd gone down at work. Word gets around. You think I'm going to let some rookie nurse be the only one nagging you? She set her purse on her lap, and really looked at me. Not at the monitors or the IV drip, but at my face. Okay, she said. What's really going on, George? I hesitated. With my kids, I'd chosen every word careful as glass. With Ellen, 30 years of shared break rooms and busted machinery yawned between us. We'd spent half our lives together in that factory, fixing other people's messes. She'd seen me sweaty, swearing, hunched over a jammed conveyor belt at 3 a.m. Somehow this felt more intimate than all that. They say there's blockages, I said finally. Need a stent. Soon. Her jaw tightened. Can they do it? Insurance covers most, I said. But there's a co-pay, nearly $5,000. They've got some charity money that might cover part, but there's still a gap. She nodded, slowly waiting. I forced myself to continue. I called Mark and Lisa, I said. Asked if they could help cover the rest. Split it 3 ways. They can't. The word tasted rancid. Too much debt. Kids stuff. You know the song. Ellen's eyes narrowed. They said no. They said they're thinking long-term. That going into debt for this would be irresponsible. I tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. Used my own lectures against me, if you can believe it. Her mouth pressed into a line. In all the years I'd known her, I'd seen Ellen irritated, tired, even furious at a broken boiler. I'd never seen her look quite like that, like someone had insulted something sacred. After everything, she started, then stopped herself. George, you worked double shifts half your life so those kids could have what they wanted. You remember Christmas shutdowns. You were the one always volunteering for maintenance call-ins. Somebody had to keep the place from burning down, I said. You fixed everybody else's problems for 30 years, she said, leaning forward. Electrical, plumbing, scheduling. You covered for people so they could go to their kids' recitals. You swapped shifts so folks could take vacations. You paid for Mark's second semester when his loan didn't come through. I remember you coming in dead on your feet for that. I blinked. I'd forgotten she'd known that much about my life. You are not a burden, she said firmly. You're the guy who showed up at 2 a.m. with a wrench and a thermos. If your kids don't see that your life is worth more than $5,000, that's their problem, not yours. My throat burned. I never thought I'd be borrowing money to keep breathing, I admitted. I thought that's what family was for. Ellen sat back studying me. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small checkbook, the old-fashioned kind with carbon copies. What are you doing? I asked warily. Solving a problem, she said. Like always. Ellen. George, my husband, died 8 years ago, she said, not looking up as she wrote. Left me a stack of life insurance I didn't even know he'd signed up for. I've been living off his pension and my savings, and I'm not exactly blowing it on yachts. I can afford this. She tore the check free and held it up, the paper trembling just slightly between her fingers. Here, she said, $5,000. Interest free. Pay me back by living long enough to tell me your bad jokes for another 10 years. I stared at the rectangle of paper like it was something radioactive. I can't take that. I whispered. I'd never forgive myself if something happened to you and you needed that money. I don't have kids, she reminded me. I've got a paid-off condo, a boring car, and more houseplants than I know what to do with. This, she wiggled the check. This is sitting in an account doing nothing. Meanwhile, your arteries are staging a mutiny. Seems like a pretty good use of funds to me. A shame and relief crashed into each other inside me. It's not right, I said. My own kids. Your own kids made their choice. She cut in, not unkindly. I'm making mine. Don't argue, George. Take the stupid check. I reached for it slowly, my hand shaking more than I wanted. When the paper touched my skin, I felt something unclench. My eyes blurred. Thank you, I said the words inadequate. I thank you. She patted my hand. You can thank me by doing what the doctor says, and not trying to fix anything mechanical for at least 6 months. Ellen marched that check straight to the billing office, with the determined stride I'd seen her use on uncooperative shift supervisors. Between her money and the charity fund Carla had secured, the co-pay vanished as an obstacle. By the end of the day, Dr. Pale came back into my room with a different look in his eyes. We've got everything we need, he said. We'll schedule the procedure for tomorrow morning. My heart lurched for a different reason. So it's happening. It's happening? He confirmed. We'll get you taken care of, Mr. Harris. You made the right call. I didn't tell him that the right call hadn't been mine alone. When Mark and Lisa heard, whether from me or from a billing alert, I'm still not sure. They both appeared in my doorway within hours, like vultures catching the scent of something they weren't sure was dead yet. You got the money? Mark asked. No hello. I did, I said. A friend helped. The charity fund covered a chunk. We're set. Lisa's eyebrows shot up. A friend. Ellen from the plant, I said. She loaned me the difference. They exchanged a look that made my stomach twist. You didn't need to involve other people in this, Lisa said, a little too quickly. We were still figuring things out. We could have worked something out eventually. Eventually, I repeated. The doctor wanted to do this as soon as possible. I didn't feel like scheduling my heart around your spreadsheets. Mark bristled. We weren't abandoning you, Dad. We just needed time. And now you've gone and taken money from someone else. How are you going to pay her back? Be not dying, I said flatly. She seemed to think that was a fair return on investment. They both looked uncomfortable. Neither of them said, We'll cover it and you can pay us instead. They didn't offer to send Ellen a dime. The morning of the surgery, as they wheeled me down the hall, Ellen walked alongside the gurney until the nurse gently steered her back. "I'll be here when you wake up," she promised. "Don't do anything stupid in there." I wanted to say something profound. Something to capture what it meant that a woman who shared no blood with me was standing sentinel over my life while my own children checked their phones in the waiting room. All that came out was, "Don't steal my Jell-O while I'm under," she snorted. "No promises." I went under to the sound of her laugh. The surgery itself is a blur of bright lights and cold air, and the anesthesiologist's voice fading. When I came to in recovery, my chest sore but my breath somehow deeper, the first face I saw was Ellen's. Her hair was mussed, her eyes rimmed red, but she smiled when she saw me stir. "Welcome back, Lazarus," she said softly. "You still here?" I rasped. My throat felt like sandpaper. "Somebody had to make sure they put all the parts back in the right place," she replied. "How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a truck," I said. "But less like I'm about to die." "That's the idea," she said. True to form, she was there again the next day. And the next. When the kids came, it was for short visits squeezed between work and soccer practice. Ellen came with crossword puzzles and stories from the old days at the plant, and once a thermos of decent coffee smuggled past the nurses. We talked about everything. Margaret, the factory, the strange, empty stretch of life after retirement. One afternoon, as I complained about feeling useless, she raised an eyebrow. "You know," she said, "you've got more going for you than you think." "Such as?" I asked. "I'm old, full of stents, and my kids think I'm an expense report." She snorted. "You've got a paid-off house in a neighborhood that's suddenly trendy with young couples. Property values are climbing. You've got a steady pension, Social Security, and now a second chance at life. That's not nothing." "I've got about as much sense with investments as I do with TikTok," I said. "Which is to say?" "Then it's good you know someone who does," she replied. "When Frank died, I had no idea what to do with the life insurance. I would have stuck it all in a savings account making pennies. Instead, a friend introduced me to a financial advisor, another Patel, actually, no relation to your doc, smart man, conservative, not one of those hotshot types. Helped me put money in a mix of boring things that still grew. I thought about my 60,000, about how vulnerable I'd felt with a single unexpected bill. "It's too late for me to learn all that?" I said. "Rubbish," she said. "It's never too late to learn how to make your money work so you don't have to break your back. You of all people have earned a little ease." She saw the hesitation on my face and softened her tone. "Just talk to him," she said. "No obligation. I'll be there. We'll ask all the stupid questions together." I lay there, feeling the steady thump of my newly propped open heart, and thought about it. I thought about how quickly my small cushion had evaporated when trouble came. I thought about how my children had reacted when asked to help. I thought about Ellen's check, written without hesitation. "If I get out of here in one piece," I said slowly, "I suppose I owe it to myself to be smarter with what I've got." "And to me," she said, poking my arm. "I didn't shell out $5,000 so you could sit on your mattress savings like a dragon on a shoebox of cash." I smiled, the first genuine one in days. "All right, you win. You introduce me to this Patel of yours, and I'll try not to embarrass you." "Too late for that," she said dryly. "But we'll manage." In that moment, lying in a hospital bed propped up by machines and the unexpected kindness of a friend, something shifted in me. I was still hurt, still angry at my children, but the anger had a new edge of clarity. If I got another shot at life, I wasn't going to spend it being the man everyone took from until there was nothing left. I'd trusted the wrong people with my sacrifices for a long time. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to start trusting myself, and a few carefully chosen allies, instead. If you'd told me at 72 that I'd be sitting in a glass, walled office talking about asset allocation, I would have laughed you out of my kitchen. Yet there I was, a few months after the surgery, perched on the edge of a leather chair while a younger Mr. Patel clicked through charts on a computer screen. "Let's start with what you have," he said, voice calm, the way his cousin in the white coat had been when he talked about my arteries. "Pension, Social Security, savings, the house. He listened as I laid it all out. My modest pension, the 60,000 that had shrunk with the roof and the surgery, the paid-off little box of a house in a neighborhood that had somehow become ope and coming, while I wasn't looking. "You're in a better position than you think, George," he said when I was done. "You've done a lot right already. With patience, this can grow into a real cushion. Feels more like a thin blanket with holes," I muttered. He smiled. "Then we patched the holes, not with anything fancy. Some conservative bonds, a high-yield savings account instead of your current bank, maybe a small annuity to guarantee income later. And you mentioned you have space over your garage. That could be rental income if we fix it up." Ellen, sitting beside me like a chaperone, elbowed my ribs. "Told you your junk-filled loft was prime real estate." Over the next few months, with their help, I did things I'd always assumed were for other people. We moved my money into accounts that actually paid attention to interest. We fixed up the small room over the garage. Paint, new carpet, a mini fridge. A young nurse from the hospital ended up renting it. Quiet as a mouse and always on time with the check. I clipped coupons, watched my spending, and for the first time in my life, every dollar had a job beyond. Vanish as soon as the kids need something. I stopped being the family safety net and started being my own. 2 years slipped by like that. I went to cardiac rehab, walked laps around the park instead of aisles at the plant. The scar inside my chest faded. The one in my heart from my children never quite did, but it stopped bleeding. The day I handed Ellen a check for the exact amount she'd written for my surgery plus a little extra for interest. My idea, not hers, was one of the sweetest of my old age. "Absolutely not," she said when she saw the additional figure. "I told you interest-free. And I told you I don't take charity," I said. "You saved my life. It's the least I can do to make your accountant happy." She took it, eventually, shaking her head. "Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for having something," she said, her palm warm over mine. "You earned your peace, George. For a while, it seemed like maybe I would get to enjoy that peace. Then life, as it likes to do, yanked the rug again. Ellen died on a Tuesday. Heart, they said. Quick. Quicker than mine anyway. 1 minute she was arguing with a grocery clerk about expired coupons, the next she was gone. Losing her hurt in a way that felt too familiar, a Margaret-shaped ache with a new edge. I went through the motions, funeral casseroles, the hollow feeling of walking out of a cemetery without one of the few people who saw me clearly. Weeks later, I got a call from a lawyer handling her estate. I went to his office expecting to sign some condolence book. Instead, he slid a document across the desk. "She left you this," he said. It was another check. Only this time the number had more zeros than anything I'd ever seen with my name on it. $150,000, give or take. In her will, she'd written to George Harris, who was like family when I didn't have any. Between that, the slow, steady growth of Mr. Patel's boring investments, the rent from the garage room, and the ridiculous rise in my property value, my net worth crept up while I was just trying to make it through each day. One afternoon, Mr. Patel showed me a summary sheet. "All told," he said, "between liquid assets, investments, and the current market value of your home, you're approaching around $500,000. I stared at the number. $500,000. The same heart that had almost failed over 5,000 fluttered for a different reason. "Seems obscene," I said. "Me, with that kind of money. It seems like overdue compensation," he countered. "Don't think of it as a lottery win. Think of it as the sum of a life's work, managed properly at last." I went home that day with the printout in my pocket, feeling both rich and strangely exposed. I wasn't stupid. I knew news like that had a way of seeping through a family, even when you didn't say a word. I'd already seen the early signs. After the surgery, Mark and Lisa's visits had picked up, slowly at first. A Sunday here, a Wednesday phone call there. At first, I'd let myself believe guilt was nudging them back. Then the conversation started circling the same drain. "So, Dad," Mark said one afternoon, standing in my backyard, eyeing the fence line, "have you thought about what you'll do with the house, down the line?" "Live in it," I said. "D in it, if I'm lucky." He laughed like I'd made a joke. "I mean, the market's crazy right now. You could sell this place for a small fortune, move into a condo or somewhere easier, bank the rest. It'd be smart." Lisa chimed in over coffee another day. Our neighbor's parents just did that, she said. They sold their house, moved into assisted living before things got bad. Their kids didn't have to deal with any of the, mess. I began to notice how often phrases like, down the line, when you're gone, and what happens to everything slipped into our small talk. They asked, in what they thought were casual tones, if I'd updated my will since the surgery, whether I'd considered long-term care insurance, if I knew how much maintenance really cost on a house this old. I decided then that if they wanted to treat me like some anxious old man sitting on a treasure chest, I'd let them. I played up the confusion a little, let my hand tremble when I unfolded bills in front of them. Mr. Patel says things are fine, I'd say, as if I could barely follow. He's got it all in some accounts. I don't really understand it. Stared it. Mark repeated, his tone tightening. You've got some financial guy making decisions for you. Why didn't you talk to us first? Didn't want to bother you, I said mildly. You were so busy last time I needed help. Lisa frowned. We just want to make sure nobody takes advantage of you, Dad, she said. You hear horror stories about elderly people getting talked into things. I nodded solemnly. Oh, I know all about people talking old folks into things that aren't in their best interest, I said. Believe me. One Sunday, a few months after Ellen's will check cleared and settled into my accounts, they both came over just to check in. We had lunch, sandwiches, and awkward small talk. Afterward, I settled into my recliner in the living room, intending to watch a ball game. The afternoon sun made me drowsy, and despite myself, I drifted. Or at least, I let them think I did. People forget that old ears don't stop hearing just because old eyes are closed. From my chair, head tipped back, I heard their voices carry from the kitchen. If we don't get him into a home soon, Mark was saying in a low voice, I'll burn through it. Between property taxes and whatever this Patel guy is doing, there'll be nothing left by the time. By the time what? They didn't say. Lisa sighed. I know, and if he gets worse mentally, it'll be even harder to get him to sign anything. We should get him to sign power of attorney before that happens. You heard him last week. He repeated the same story twice in 10 minutes. I had repeated the story and watched them share a look. I'd also been very aware of what I was doing. You think he'll go for it? Mark asked. We just have to frame it right, Lisa replied. Like we're protecting him. If we tell him horror stories about scams, he'll hand over the reins. Then we can make sure nothing stupid happens with the house and the accounts. Stupid in this context probably meant anything that didn't end with their names on large checks. If he digs in, Mark said. Lisa's voice dropped. Then we back off a little, visit less, let him see how hard it is alone. He hates the idea of being a burden. We can remind him of that. I lay there, my heart pounding so loud I was afraid they'd hear it over the hum of the fridge. Any lingering doubt I'd entertained about their motives shriveled up like a leaf on a hot stove. They weren't coming around because they'd had a change of heart. They were circling, waiting for the right moment to take the wheel. Not because they feared for my safety, but because they feared for their inheritance. When they came back into the living room, I was asleep, snoring gently. They tiptoed around me, guilt whispering at the edges of their conversation. I kept my breathing even until they left, then opened my eyes to the empty room. That night I called Mr. Patel. I need a different kind of help, I said. You know any good lawyers who deal with people my age? He did. A week later I sat in a different office, this one lined with law books instead of stock charts. Ms. Carter was in her 50s, hair shot through with gray, glasses sliding down her nose as she listened to me talk. I told her everything. The heart attack scare, the $5,000 bill, Ellen's check, the surgery, the inheritance I never expected. And most of all, I told her about my children, their refusal, their sudden interest when the numbers got bigger. The conversation I'd overheard, in my own kitchen. She didn't interrupt much. When I finished, she steepled her fingers. You're not powerless, Mr. Harris, she said. Far from it. The law can be on your side if we're smart and discreet. What does that look like? I asked. A new will for starters, she said. And a living trust. We can move most of your assets into it now, with very clear instructions about what happens when you're gone. We can also designate who has what authority if you become incapacitated. It doesn't have to be your children. It can be your advisor, a bank, even a professional fiduciary. And if they try to shove papers under my nose, I asked, we make sure anything not from my office is automatically suspect, she said. And if you're concerned about pressure at home, we can document that. Install a simple recording device in the room where these conversations tend to happen. Even if it's not for court, it can be useful leverage. I sat back, absorbing it all. For the first time since that hospital bill landed in my lap, I felt something other than fear or hurt. I felt strategic. They put a price on my life, I said slowly. $5,000. I never forgot that number. And Miss Carter watched me waiting. I decided back then, lying in that bed, that if I walked out of that hospital, I wouldn't let anyone treat me like a burden again. I continued. If they want to see my money as the only reason I matter, fine. I'll make sure that for once in my life, their greed works in my favor. How so? She asked. I'll let them talk, I said. Let them scheme. Let them think I'm getting more and more confused. Meanwhile, you and Mr. Patel and I will put every protection in place. And when the time comes for them to find out what I actually did with this money, well, sometimes the bill comes due. I walked out of her office with a folder thicker than my hospital file, my head buzzing with terms like revocable trust and no contest clause. The sun felt bright on my face, my knees ached, and my heart ticked along steadily, thanks to a friend who'd valued it more than my own blood. On the bus ride home, I watched young people scroll through their phones, earbuds in, the world moving too fast. I sat there, an old man with a plan, and thought, you called me a burden for wanting to live. Let's see how you feel when you find out I used that second chance to make sure you can't buy and sell me ever again. Their greed had almost killed me once. Now I decided it would be my insurance policy. If there's one thing getting old teaches you, it's patience. Patience with your body, your memories, other people's assumptions. I decided to use that to my advantage. With Miss Carter's help, I put the bones of my plan in place before I ever let my children know anything had changed. We sat in her office, week after week, going over documents until the legal language started to sound almost familiar. This section, she'd say, tapping with her pen, puts the bulk of your assets into the living trust. When you die, the trustee distributes according to these instructions, not whatever story anyone else decides to tell. And this part, I asked, squinting at a paragraph. That, she said, is the no contest clause. If anyone tries to challenge this will without a very good reason, they risk losing even the small share you're leaving them. I couldn't help a wry grin. So if they get greedy at the end, they might walk away with less than if they'd kept quiet. She nodded. It doesn't stop lawsuits entirely, but it discourages them. Combined with your trust and your documentation, you're building a solid wall. The bulk of my assets sounded grander than it was, but it was still more than anyone expected an old factory man to leave behind. We designated most of it for a scholarship fund at the community college, a grant in Ellen's name for women in trades, a modest trust for her nieces and nephews. I carved out small slices for a few neighbors who checked on me without ever asking what I had. And for Mark and Lisa, I left something. $5,000 each, I said when Ms. Carter asked what number felt right. In memory of the last time I knew exactly what my life was worth to them. She raised an eyebrow. Symbolic. That's the point, I said. On her advice, we moved my accounts into the trust while I was very much alive. The house, the investments, the savings, most of it no longer sat in my name alone. On paper, I still lived there, still paid the bills. But if someone thought they could swoop in and seize control with a few signatures, they were in for a surprise. Now, Ms. Carter said, closing the file with a decisive thump, we let life happen. And if they push, we document. So I went home and did what old men do. I sat in my recliner. I watched the neighborhood. I watered my plants too often and my tomato leaves too little, and I waited. It didn't take long. About a month after I'd signed the trust papers, Mark and Lisa arrived together one Saturday, carrying a grocery bag and the smell of overdone politeness. Brought you some things, Lisa said, unloading milk and bread like an offering. Thought you could use the help. I thanked them, made coffee, and pretended not to notice the crisp manila envelope Mark kept shuffling from one hand to the other. We settled in the living room. That room had seen birthday parties and homework battles, Margaret's quilting, Ellen's chuckles. Lately, it had hosted a little piece of technology. Miss Carter had suggested a small, ordinary-looking digital clock on the shelf above the TV, with a lens so tiny you'd miss it unless you were looking. Security, I'd said when the installer asked. Just in case. Then I'd placed it where it had a clear view of my recliner and the couch opposite, and I'd done my best to forget about it. Until now. So, Mark began, clearing his throat. Lisa and I have been talking. Dangerous habit, I said mildly. What'd you break? He forced a laugh and pulled out the envelope. We just want to be ready in case something happens to you, Dad. After the scare with your heart, it made us think. That's rich, I thought. Took more than a scare to make you think last time. Out loud, I only said, Is that so? He spread a stack of papers on the coffee table, forms printed off some legal website. I caught phrases in bold, durable power of attorney. Healthcare proxy. Transfer on death. These are just some standard documents. Lisa said quickly. Lots of families do this. It would make everything simpler. For everyone? For everyone. I echoed. How's that? Well, Mark said. If our names were on your accounts, we could pay your bills if you ever got confused. Handle insurance claims, taxes. If there was an emergency, like last time, we wouldn't have to scramble. With our names on things, it's seamless. With your names on my accounts, I said, things would be seamless. He smiled, missing the edge in my tone. Exactly. I leaned back in my chair, let my shoulders slump a little, my brow furrow as if I were struggling to keep up. You think I won't be good at keeping track of bills anymore? I asked, voice tentative. No, Lisa said quickly. It's not about that. It's about control. I mean safety. If something happened suddenly, what if you fell again or had another episode? This way we could just step in. No waiting on courts or anything. Probate is a nightmare. Mark added, as if he'd just graduated from law school. This avoids all that. Protects the assets. There it was. Protects the assets. And all I have to do, I said slowly, letting my gaze drift to the clock on the shelf, is sign all this today. Well, it'd be easier, Mark said. We already printed everything. No need to drag a lawyer into it. Those people just make things more complicated than they need to be. Lawyers? I repeated. Complicated, are they? Sometimes you don't need them, Lisa said. This is just family stuff. We're your kids. We're just trying to help. I picked up one of the forms, held it close like I was squinting at the fine print. It says here you'd be able to sell assets, I said. Is that right? Only if we had to, Mark said quickly. Like if you needed to move to assisted living, or if the house became too much to maintain. Or if Mr. Padel screws something up, Lisa added. We could move money around, keep it safe. You don't want some stranger having that kind of control. I set the paper down, careful, like it might explode. My hands trembled just enough to be plausible. I appreciate you bringing this, I said. I really do. My mind isn't what it used to be. Things get fuzzy. Mark leaned in, sensing victory. Then let us help. Just sign, Dad. It'll give us all peace of mind. I'd like Miss Carter to look at these first, I said. The air changed. Mark pulled back. Ooh, my lawyer, I said. Miss Carter. She's been helping me with some paperwork. I don't sign things I don't understand anymore. Got myself into enough trouble that way. You went to a lawyer, Lisa said, her voice a little too sharp. Without talking to us. Seemed safer, I said softly. All those horror stories about people being taken advantage of. Dade, Mark said, frustration leaking through now. We're not scammers. We're your children. We're the ones who'll be dealing with all this when you're gone. Why would you trust some lawyer over us? I met his eyes, let just a flicker of steel show. Why did you trust your credit cards more than my heartbeat? I asked quietly. He flushed. Lisa jumped in before he could answer. You're throwing that in our faces again, she said, eyes filling perfectly on cue. Do you know how hard that time was for us? We were terrified too. But all you remember is money. I remember, I said. Being told $5,000 was too much to ask. Forgive me if that sticks. They left in a huff that afternoon, the unsigned forms stuffed back into their envelope. I watched from the window as they walked to the car, hands flying as they argued. When the taillights disappeared, I went to the shelf, took down the clock, and turned it between my hands. The little red light that blinked when it was recording was off now, but I knew what was stored inside. Their words, their eagerness, their insistence that lawyers were the enemy, that my assets needed protecting by them. A week later they came back. Anger had had time to simmer. "We're trying, Dad," Mark said, louder this time, pacing my living room. "We're offering to help, and you keep acting like we're out to get you. You're making us feel like thieves," Lisa added, dabbing at her eyes. "It was traumatic, what happened at the hospital. We did the best we could, and you keep punishing us." "Punishing you," I repeated. "By not handing over my life savings. You want us to help you or not?" Mark snapped. His voice echoed off the walls. If the recorder missed that, I'd eat my hat. "I want you to be my children," I said. "Not my bankers." Lisa's tears dried up fast. "If you don't trust us with this," she said, her tone turning cold, "maybe we should just stay out of your life. Maybe you can let your lawyer and that Patel guy visit you in the hospital next time." Something in my chest clenched, but I kept my face slack. "If that's what you feel you need to do," I said, "that's your choice." Mark slammed a hand down on the back of the couch. "We're the ones who deserve this house and money after everything," he burst out. "We'll put up with your moods, your health scares, all of it. And you're going to give it away to strangers." Lisa nodded sharply. "If you keep wasting it on lawyers and strangers, don't expect us to cry when you're gone." There it was. Clean, simple, honest in the ugliest way. They stormed out again. When the door clicked behind them, the house felt very, very quiet. I stood there for a long moment, listening to my heart. It was steady. The next day, I sat back in Ms. Carter's office, the little device on her desk between us like a confession. She listened to the recording with her brows knitting together, then sat back. "Well," she said, "that's clarifying. Can I use it in court?" I asked. "Probably not as formal evidence unless certain conditions are met," she said. "Our state has tricky recording laws. But in terms of understanding their intent, in terms of you knowing you're not imagining this, it's invaluable. And if it ever came to a mediated discussion, playing a few choice minutes might shift the tone. Or it might just show them exactly why they got what they got," I said. She nodded. "Your legal setup is solid, George. The trust, the will, the medical directives. It would take a very determined and very foolish lawyer to try to crack this. Especially with their own words on record. We finalized the last batch of documents that day." She sent registered letters to Mark and Lisa, informing them in formal language that all future legal matters concerning my estate would go through her office, that I had appointed her firm and Mr. Patel as my primary advisors, and that any documents they wished me to sign must be reviewed by her. "Let them talk," she said as I stood to go. "People show you who they are when they think no one's listening. You've given them that chance. Now you can sleep." Sleep came easier after that. Not because the hurt had gone, it hadn't, but because the fear had. They could huff and puff and wave forms in my face, but the foundation of my life, what I'd worked for and what I wanted it to mean, was anchored where their hands couldn't easily reach. So when they sat at my kitchen table that day, the day this story began, with my blue folder and my lawyer's envelope between us, asking to help manage my $500,000, they had no idea. No idea that most of that money was already spoken for. No idea that their names were footnotes, not headlines, in my will. No idea that I'd heard every greedy word they'd said when they thought I was asleep. They still saw the man in the hospital gown, tubes in his arms, asking for help. What they didn't see was the man who'd walked out of that hospital, sat in lawyers' offices, learned about trusts and annuities, and decided that if his children could put a price on his life, he could put a value on his legacy. Let them think I'm weak, I thought, watching them squirm in my kitchen. Let them think I'm confused. It just makes what's coming easier to swallow, for me at least. For them, well, that was another bill they were about to open. I sat there at my own kitchen table, looking at the two people I'd once carried on my shoulders, and thought, this is what it comes down to. Numbers and signatures and how much a heartbeat is worth. Mark shifted in his chair, impatience starting to bleed through the fake concern. Lisa kept glancing between my face and the blue folder by my elbow, the one with my bank statements and Miss Carter's letter tucked inside. Jenny had gone quiet altogether, standing by the sink like she wished she were anywhere else. "So?" I said finally, letting the silence stretch. "You want to help manage my money?" "It's not about the money," Lisa insisted. "It's about making sure you're safe. That everything's handled." Handled, I repeated. Funny word. I remember another time when things needed handling. At the hospital. Mark sighed. "Dad, we've been over this." "No," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "You've avoided this. I've held my tongue to keep the peace. That ends today." I folded my hands on the table. They looked old, veins raised, knuckles swollen, but they didn't shake. "Let me refresh your memory," I said. 2 years ago, I collapsed at the hardware store. They told me my arteries were clogged and I needed a stent. The insurance covered most. There was a bill for just under $5,000. You remember that number? Lisa's mouth tightened. "We remember the situation," she said. "It was complicated." "It was simple," I replied. "I was going to die without the procedure. I had $1,500 I could scrape together. I called you both. I asked if we could split the rest 3 ways. Less than $1,000 each."
"Oh, you know we didn't have it,"
Mark said quickly. "We were drowning in debt. The truck, the cards. You asked if the hospital could work out a payment plan." I went on, as if he hadn't spoken. "You told me $5,000 was a lot right now. You talked about interest rates and your truck needing repairs." I turned to Lisa. "You said you just paid for Ethan's braces. That daycare was killing you. We don't have $5,000 just lying around, Dad, you told me. We just can't take that kind of hit, not with the kids. You understand, don't you?" Her cheeks flushed. "You're twisting it." "No," I said quietly. "I'm recalling it, very clearly. I remember sitting in that hospital cafeteria, listening to you talk about cheaper hospitals out of town, state facilities, maybe skipping the surgery altogether and managing on meds. I remember asking, if we split it 3 ways, that's less than $1,000 each. And I remember the way you both looked at me like I'd asked you to burn down your own houses." "We were scared," Lisa protested. "We didn't want to lose you." "You didn't want to lose your stability," I corrected. "Your savings, your plans. You reminded me that I'd said I didn't want to be a burden. You implied that if you helped me then, you wouldn't be able to help me later. As if living long enough to maybe need more care was some selfish decision on my part." Mark slammed his palm lightly on the table. "It wasn't like that. You're making us sound like monsters." I leaned back, studied him. "You know, it's funny you use that word. Because there is something that does sound monstrous. And I'd like you to hear it with fresh ears." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black device. Just a simple little speaker. I set it on the table and pressed a button. The room filled with the faint hiss of recorded air. Then our own voices warped slightly by the microphone but unmistakable. "If we don't get him into a home soon, he'll burn through it," Mark's voice said from the speaker. "Between property taxes and whatever this Patel guy is doing, there'll be nothing left by the time he dies." Lisa's voice finished, low. "We should get him to sign power of attorney before he gets worse." You heard him last week. He repeated the same story twice in 10 minutes. There was a soft clink on the recording, then Lisa again. "We just have to frame it right. Like we're protecting him. If we tell him horror stories about scams, he'll hand over the reins. Then we can make sure nothing stupid happens with the house and the accounts." On the other side of the table, the real Mark and Lisa had gone utterly still. Mark's skin turned a dangerous shade of red. Lisa's lips parted in silent horror. I let the recording play on. "You're making us feel like thieves." "Past," Lisa said, voice sharp. "It was traumatic, what happened at the hospital. We did the best we could, and you keep punishing us." Present, Lisa flinched. "Dad, we're not scammers." "Recorded," Mark snapped. "We're your children. We're the ones who'll be dealing with all this when you're gone. Why would you trust some lawyer over us?" Then the part I'd wanted them to hear most. We're the ones who deserve this house and money after everything. Mark's recorded voice burst out. We'll put up with your moods, your health scares, all of it. And you're going to give it away to strangers. If you keep wasting it on lawyers and strangers. Lisa's voice added, hard as stone. Don't expect us to cry when you're gone. I clicked the device off. The silence that followed was different from all the others we'd shared. Thicker, heavier. Like the air itself had decided to hold its breath. What is that? Mark stammered. That, I said calmly, is how you talk when you think I'm asleep in my own recliner. This is what my life and my money really mean to you when you think no one is listening. You recorded us. Lisa's voice rose. That's illegal. That's creepy. What's creepy? I countered. Is standing in a man's kitchen, discussing how to manipulate him into signing away control of his own life. What's illegal, maybe, is less important to me right now than what's true. Jenny finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark, did you really say that? He rounded on her. You're seriously going to take his side right now? I held up a hand. This isn't about sides. This is about facts. You had a chance to show me who you were when I was at my weakest. You chose money then. You've chosen it again and again since. I just decided to stop pretending not to notice. I picked up Ms. Carter's envelope and slid out the letter, the one on heavy paper with her firm's name at the top. Since we're being honest, I said, unfolding it carefully. Let me show you what I've chosen. Dade, you don't have to. Lisa started. I do, I said. Because you came here today under the impression that you could still influence what happens when I die. You need to know that window closed a long time ago. I adjusted my glasses and read, not every word, but the important parts. This letter is to confirm, I paraphrased, that your estate documents have been executed as per your instructions. Upon your death, the assets in the Harris Living Trust will be distributed as follows. I looked up. My house, when sold, will fund a scholarship at the community college for students from working-class families. In Ellen Davis's name. Lisa blinked. Who? The woman who wrote the check that paid for my surgery? I said. The one who visited me more days in the hospital than both of you combined. The one you called some friend you didn't need me to involve. I looked back at the letter. A portion of my savings. I continued. Will endow a grant for single parents in trade programs. Another portion goes into a small trust for Ellen's nieces and nephews. A bit for the neighbor down the street whose husband died, and who still brings me soup without asking for anything. Some to the community center that kept your children busy in the summers so you could go to work without worrying. Mark's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. And you, I said at last, letting my gaze rest on each of them in turn. You are not forgotten. Ms. Carter was very careful about that. You each receive a bequest. I slid 2 smaller envelopes across the table. Their names were written on them in Miss Carter's neat, impersonal script. How much? Mark demanded, not even bothering to hide it. $5,000, I said. Each. In memory of the value you once placed on my life. For a moment, no one breathed. You're kidding, Lisa whispered. You once told me 5,000 was too much to save my life, I said softly. Consider this my way of agreeing with you. My life, my money, my decision. Mark lurched to his feet, his chair scraping loudly. This is insane, he shouted. You're giving our inheritance to strangers. To some dead coworker's family. To a bunch of nobodies. Nobodies, I repeated. You mean the people who were there when I needed them? The kids in this neighborhood who remind me of you when you didn't have cable. Just a beat-up baseball and imagination. The single moms trying to keep their heads above water without throwing their parents overboard. We're your family, he yelled. We're blood. I stood up too, slowly, my knees protesting. The room felt very small. Family, I said. It was what you do, not what you're owed. Lisa's tears spilled over. You're punishing us, she sobbed, for being honest about our finances back then. We were drowning, Dad. We couldn't just pull 5,000 out of thin air. How is it fair to hold that over our heads forever? You think this is about fairness? I asked. You're right that you couldn't pull 5,000 out of thin air. Neither could I, not without help. The difference is, I would have walked into a bank and signed every paper they put in front of me if it meant keeping you alive. I did it over and over, so you could have braces, college, first cars, safety nets. When it was my turn, you treated me like a line item in your budget. I took a breath, felt my heart beat strong in my chest. I am not punishing you for being poor, I said. I am holding you accountable for being selfish. Mark sneered. Easy to say now that you're sitting on $500,000. It wasn't easy. I shot back. It came from 70 years of work, the kindness of a friend you barely acknowledged, and luck I never expected. I didn't owe you any of it, and after you showed me what my life was worth to you, I decided not to pretend I did. Jenny had tears in her eyes now too, but she stayed silent. I loved you, I went on, voice shaking for the first time. I still do, God help me. I worked myself half to death so you could have more than I did. When I was lying in that hospital bed, scared out of my mind, I thought, at least my kids will be here. At least I won't have to face this alone. I looked from one to the other, saw a flicker of something, shame, cross Lisa's face. You were there in body, I said, but your hearts were already at home, counting what you might lose. So now, that's what I remember. Not the casseroles, not the hurried visits. The calculation. Silence stretched again, heavy and painful. I'm not throwing you out of my life, I said at last, more quietly. I'm done chasing you, done bending my needs around your comfort, done letting you dangle visits over my head like rewards. You are welcome in this house as my children, if you can remember what that means. But you are not welcome as my future payday. If you can't separate those things, then the door is right there. Mark's jaw worked. You think this is over? He snapped. You think some fancy paperwork changes the fact that we're your heirs? I'll find a lawyer who'll tear this apart. That trust, that will. He'll say you weren't in your right mind. That you were manipulated. Carter anticipated that, I said. So did Mr. Patel. So did I. We have medical evaluations dated and signed. We have years of documented decisions. We have conversations like the one you just heard. You can waste your money on lawyers if you like. Mine is already spoken for. He looked around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. The worn table, the scuffed cabinets, the place he'd grown up. Then he grabbed his coat. Come on, Jen, he said. We're leaving. Jenny hesitated, gave me a small, sorrowful nod, then followed him out. The door slammed. His car peeled away a little too fast. Lisa stayed seated, eyes fixed on the envelopes in front of her. I never thought you'd do this to us, she whispered. Neither, I said, feeling the words settle like stones in my gut. Did I think you'd do that to me? She stood slowly, pushing her chair back with a soft scrape. Are you really going to give it all away? She asked. To people who aren't us? I'm giving it, I said. To people who proved they cared whether I lived, not just whether I died with a balance in the bank. You could have been among them. You chose not to be. She pressed her lips together, tears spilling over. For a moment I thought she might cross the room, might reach for my hand the way she had when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. Instead, she picked up her envelope, weighed it in her palm like it burned, and set it back down. I need time, she said hoarsely. To think. You've had years, I replied, but there was no heat left in it. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the knob. I do love you, she said without turning around. I know, I answered. But love without sacrifice is just a feeling. I learned that the hard way. I hope you never have to. The door closed softly behind her. The house was quiet again, just me and the tick of the clock on the wall. I sank back into my chair, every joint protesting, and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since that day in the hospital. Justice doesn't feel like triumph when it comes at the expense of your own children. It feels like standing on a shore watching a ship you built yourself sail away in the wrong direction. But it also felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was standing on solid ground instead of quicksand. They had named the price of my life once. I had simply decided in the end to send them a bill of my own. In the months after that kitchen table reckoning, things didn't explode so much as crumble. 2 weeks later, a letter came by certified mail, all bluster and boilerplate. Some lawyer Mark scraped off the internet, claiming my recent legal arrangements were suspect that my age and health conditions raised questions about my capacity. It hinted that any attempt to disinherit rightful heirs would be vigorously challenged. I took it to Miss Carter. She read it once, then again, her lips twitching, not quite into a smile. "I've seen this type," she said. "Lots of bark, very little bite, I'll respond." Her response was calm and clinical. She enclosed copies of my dated psychological evaluations, notes from Mr. Patel about my active participation in financial decisions, and a brief mention that there existed recordings demonstrating my children's focus on assets over care. She didn't have to send the audio. The hint was enough. A month later, I got another letter from the same lawyer, this time advising Mark to reconsider litigation given the strength of the opposing documentation. That fizzled, just like Ms. Carter said it would. Funny how fast righteous outrage dries up when it runs into a wall of facts and legal fees. Mark hasn't been back since. Every now and then, I hear about him from Jenny's Christmas card or a neighbor who runs into them at the store. Apparently, I'm under the influence. It's easier, I suppose, to believe that than to look straight at what he did. Lisa was different. For a while, I got stilted text messages. "How are you feeling, Dad?" Kids say hi. Then silence for weeks. Then a photo of the grandkids at Halloween, my granddaughter dressed as a doctor. That one hit a nerve. I answered each one politely, but briefly. I didn't chase. The balance had shifted. I meant to keep it that way. Meanwhile, life didn't stop waiting for any of us to sort out our feelings. The community center invited me to a ceremony when they announced the new scholarship fund that would one day bear Ellen's name and, by extension, mine. I sat in a folding chair in a room that smelled like coffee and paint, listening to a young woman talk about being the first in her family to go to trade school without going into crushing debt. Afterward, she shook my hand without knowing who I was and said, "Whoever set this up, they changed my life." I walked home lighter than I'd felt in years. I started going to the center every Thursday afternoon, helping in a little workshop they set up. Basic home repairs, how to use a drill without putting a hole in your hand, how to read a utility bill without getting fleeced. Kids who reminded me of Mark at 15, girls who reminded me of Lisa before the world and I disappointed her. I taught them how to fix leaky faucets and change fuses, how to tell when a contractor was lying. I gave my time and my knowledge instead of my bank card. Ellen's nieces sent me a plant after the trust for them was finalized. It sits on my windowsill now, stubborn and green. Sometimes we talk on the phone. They call to tell me about a class they're taking or a trip they managed. We're not close, not like family, but there's an ease between us that doesn't have any price tags attached. One gray afternoon, months after the blow-up, Lisa showed up alone at my door. She looked older than I remembered, not in her face so much as in her shoulders, which drooped like she was carrying something heavy she didn't know how to set down. "Hey, Dad," she said. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. We sat at the same table where so much had been said. She wrapped her hands around a cup of tea more for something to do then because she wanted it. "I'm not here to talk about anything legal," she began. "I know where you stand on that. I needed to talk to you. As your daughter." I nodded, waited. "I was scared," she said finally, eyes on the steam rising from her cup. "Back then, at the hospital. We're always one emergency away from drowning, you know. The roof, the braces, the car. When you called, all I could see was one more thing that would sink us. I didn't see you." "Not really." I let her words settle. "I was scared too," I said quietly. "The difference is I was scared of dying alone, not scared of losing money." She winced. "I know. I can't undo what we said. Or what we didn't do." "No," I agreed. "You can't." Silence stretched between us, not as hostile as before, but thick with things unsaid. "I never meant to make you feel disposable," she whispered. "That you were only worth what we could afford. I've been thinking about that day ever since you played that recording. I don't like the person I sounded like." "Most of us don't," I said. "When the mask slips." She looked up then, really looked at me, and there was something raw in her eyes I hadn't seen since she was a teenager caught in a lie. "Is there any way to fix this?" she asked. "Between us, I mean. Not the money. I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. I sat with that question, felt it poke at the softer parts of me that hadn't died off completely. Forgiveness isn't a switch, I said. It's more like physical therapy. Slow, painful, and you never quite get back to where you started. She huffed a small, sad laugh. So what does that look like? It looks like this, I said, gesturing around. You here, not asking for account passwords. Me listening without waving that hospital bill in your face every 5 minutes. If you want to build something real, I'm here. But my money isn't part of that conversation anymore. Ever. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Okay, she said. I can live with that. So can I replied. We sat a while longer, talking about safer things. The kids' school, my latest disaster in the garden. It wasn't a Hallmark reconciliation. The past didn't vanish in a swell of violence. But it was a start. A small, fragile start. After she left, I looked around my quiet house. Nothing on the surface had changed. The same worn rug, the same humming fridge. Underneath, everything had. That $500,000, give or take, had become more than numbers on a page. It was a mirror. It showed me who my children really were when they thought the stakes were low, and who I was when I finally decided my dignity mattered as much as my love. They taught me what my life was worth to them. In the end, I chose to spend it on people who didn't ask me to die cheaper. If you're listening to this and thinking about your own family, here's what I've learned the hard way: money doesn't turn people greedy. It reveals the greed that was already there. Being a parent doesn't mean you owe your children your savings, especially when they wouldn't spend a fraction of theirs to keep you alive. Blood makes you related, but how you show up when it counts. That's what makes you family. So let me ask you, if you were in my place, would you have left your children anything at all after what they did? Or would you have cut them out completely? And have you ever felt like someone in your family treated you differently because of money or an inheritance? How did you handle it? Did you confront them? Or did you just quietly protect yourself? If my story made you think about family, money, and respect, share your thoughts below. I do read as many comments as I can. Don't forget to like this video if you believe elders deserve better. And subscribe for more true stories like this. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I know I'm not the only one who had to learn that sometimes protecting your peace is worth more than any inheritance.